Hello, and welcome back to the Project C Money podcast. My name is Sharissa Bradley, and I am so excited to be joined today with author Katherine MacLean. And thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for spending some time, and let's just get right into it. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
So, what is it that got you into writing in the first place?
I remember writing my first piece of creative fiction as a child. I was obsessed with writing. I had a huge imagination, and turning it into a story that other people could read was the coolest thing I could ever imagine. And I kind of kept up with that energy all the way through high school. And then I landed in college and it was like nobody cared anymore. So it's like the creative writing, inspirational, imaginative piece of me just got put on a shelf.
For how long?
15 years. Yeah, a very long time. I was told by someone who was trying to mentor me in science writing that I needed to unlearn all of my flowery extra words, all this way that I communicated my mind onto the page. I needed to unlearn all of that so I could be a scientist. So I was like, okay. And I learned a totally different way of communication, a different way of writing. And I got really good at that. But it's like the piece of me that needed to be creative and express myself just kind of withered. And it's like I kind of forgot that I could still do that until much later in life.
So, what brought it back then?
Well, I'm in a kind of strange corner of the world where I studied psychedelics, magic mushrooms. And back in the 1950s, 1960s, those chemicals were shown to promote creativity. So I can't say too much about, how much I self-experimented, although I do it in the book. But studying psilocybin, being around all these people whose whole mental health hinged on becoming more open and being able to express themselves fully really inspired me. I was like, what am I waiting for? Like, I'm seeing all of these people's lives change. I'm studying them. I'm proving that it's possible. Like, when am I going to just take that leap of faith and do the thing? Like, do the thing that I really love to do?
Yes, absolutely. So, you do study something that is, not exactly mainstream. And you do write about this, right? And you do host these, well, you talk about it, you sharing about it. You have your experiences and this is what's coming up. I'm imagining that you also faced some fear around this topic and around publishing it. Is that true?
Very much so. The book itself is very personal. So there was a whole hurdle I had to get over about putting my life out there as the story, because if someone doesn't like a book you write, okay, it's just a book. You write another book. But if someone doesn't like you, like your story, it hits a little bit harder, right? So I was kind of taking two leaps at once. And then on top of that, I was writing about things that are considered criminal or dangerous. So I reached out to, I'm very lucky in psychedelics. It's not a very large group of people, at least it wasn't 15 years ago. So I knew very famous folks who had written about mushrooms. So I reached out to them and I said, what did you do when you published your book? And they're like, oh, I didn't even really think about the risks. And of course, these were older white men. And the privilege is that they didn't have to worry about being a young mom or someone saying it was defamation or some teenager following your advice as if it's, a prescription and then doing something really stupid. So I realized I was in kind of uncharted territory and I had to figure out what my own fear and risk level was and just decide how much I was willing to go beyond that.
So then what gave you the courage to go ahead and publish it? Were you able to collect any facts that were going to protect you, or did you just have to kind of blindly do that?
Well, so one thing I did was I hired a really good lawyer. There was a law firm of women, and I was able to speak to them as a woman and say, listen, this is what I'm worried about. Let's go through what are perceived fears and risks and what are real risks. And most of my fears were just my own concerns, things that would make me feel uncomfortable, things that every artist and writer has to get over. So it was very good to have a lawyer say, listen, I know you think this is the end of the world. If you write these words down, your family's going to get upset. People are going to think one way or that way. She's like, that's just something you need to sit with. And if you get to a point where you feel okay writing this, you do it. No one's going to sue you. No one's going to come after, your life. And here are the things that as a lawyer, I'm really worried about. So let's make sure you're covered in those areas with a disclaimer, with, being smart about what you're doing. What the lawyer also helped me understand was I wasn't just afraid of some unknown thing happening. I had really seen psychedelics cause harm and I knew the risks. And I wanted to make sure that people understood what they were ingesting when they read the book.
Absolutely. And it does sound like that was able to give you some concrete confidence when it came to actually publishing it. But that doesn't really always change the fact that you're still having to face those fears. You're still having to learn how to sit with that, right? You did say that. I had to learn how to sit with it. So how long did that process take you before you were able to how long from the words, the manifestation of it, then I know I need to write this book to the point where it was actually able to be published?
Yeah. So the very first moment I knew I was going to write a book was when I was with my sister in the hospital. The book opens with that whole scene of her losing her life to cancer. I knew the book was in me and it needed to come out, and I had no idea when. So that was in 2013. I journaled, I would write down ideas, but it wasn't until 2020 that my father had died. I'd given birth to my two kids. It felt like I had done all of the other kind of things that should give me a happy life if the book wasn't a big part of that. And I was kind of still sitting there with this grief and just not feeling quite like I was ready to live that happy life. And it felt like the book was something I had to produce so that it was outside of me and not inside of me. And again, this was a very personal story, but I could imagine other creative actions being very similar. Like you have this vision and you just have to paint it. And it doesn't matter what anyone thinks about it, or a sculpture, or, you've got to build a dream house like an architect. It's just you got to get it out. So that was 2020 when I think for a lot of us, it's like everything kind of paused long enough for us to consider, if I were to die this year, if I were to lose everything, what have I not done? And so that gave me the motivation to do the scary thing, which was just to start writing. And once I started writing, it was very fast. I wrote very quickly. And then I kind of sat on it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just print it out, give it to a few friends. Maybe that's enough. And the more I sat with it, I said, I'm afraid to publish because I'm afraid to succeed. I'm afraid to fail. I'm afraid what people will think, all of the things that so many writers go through. And so that process took another year, another full year after I had finished all the writing to get to a point where I could feel like I was ready to publish it.
That's incredible. And I feel like even though the stories are not identical, I think that other authors and other creatives are going to find this really relatable because the fears are not just what is everybody going to think of me? It's what if I succeed? What if I fail? What if it flops? What if it was a waste of time? And that was, 10 almost 10 years, 8 years of your life, right? Thinking, coming up, writing, and then having it come to fruition. And so I think it's important for the audience to remember and to recognize that sometimes the idea comes, but the fear is too high. The energy just isn't right or isn't there, right? The time, the resources to actually sit down and write. And it might take 7, 8, 9, 10 years to be able to be okay with your story and your words and your vulnerability out in the public. So I think
Yeah.
that's really relatable.
And I have no idea how people sign a book idea, get a publisher, and then do the writing after that process. Like I would have just felt so pinned into a corner if I had committed to a publisher and a deadline. And I think it's worth saying that. So I study mental health, I study meditation, psychedelics, things that are designed to make people feel better in the long run. And I couldn't write a book about those things and make myself feel miserable, right? Like I needed to use the book to prove the thing that I was talking about for it to feel real, to feel truthful. And so I wanted to write in a way that made me better than I was before I started writing. And I think that's why it took time. And I do love making sure people know that if your intention is to feel better, have a happier life, whatever your goal is, then the writing better do that for you. Cause you're not going to sell a million copies. I mean, maybe some of us do. Zarna Garg did, she's like my heroine, like she did it. from nothing, but most of us won't. So if that's your goal to happiness, it's probably not going to happen. So we better make sure we're figuring out a way to take care of ourselves on the way there.
I think that's beautiful advice because there is always going to be this dream or this vision for most of us. And it's going to take time and it's going to take energy and it's going to take work, even through monotony, even through fear, even through the actual writing process. And I do still feel that if you're coming out better on the end, then it is worth it and it has been worth it. And there is so much value there. So then once you did get the book into the world, did you face vulnerability after the fact? Like, now, what are they going to think of me? What is it going to be like now?
Yes, for sure. I worked with an amazing small publisher here in Southern Vermont, Green Writers Press. They were amazing all the way through. They're mostly women owned, women run. I was surrounded by this little circle of supportive, like midwives, my publisher, my editor, my lawyers, like everyone around me was such a cheerleader for what I was doing. So I remember and even during my book launch, I felt so protected because it was like a woman owned bookstore. And like, I just had so much support. And then the day the book became available publicly, I kind of felt like I was suddenly like falling out of an airplane. It was like this shock of like, oh my gosh, it's out there. I have no protection anymore. And that was pretty scary. And I remember reading my first you see some reviews ahead of time, so you kind of know what they're going to say. And I saw my first review that I had not approved or seen. And they got it slightly wrong. They portrayed someone in the book as much like nastier than I had meant for that person to be understood. And I got really protective and I was like, oh no, what have I done? How did someone read this and not understand that I really loved this person, that they weren't a villain, that they weren't the worst person in the world? And so it was like a crash course in grappling with now the book has a life of its own. People are going to read whatever they need to read into these characters. It's almost like it was nonfiction because it was me. And now it's this almost fictional entity that other people will do whatever they're going to do with. So, and I would say that process only took a couple weeks and then it was like free fall. And then I was kind of floating and I kind of took it as it came. But those first few days, couple weeks were pretty intense.
I also think that's so relatable. And I think it's almost a false narrative to say that people are always like celebrating the day that their book comes out. I almost say like, go like walk in nature and turn off your phone and just try to like not think about it a little bit because it is kind of this very scary, vulnerable moment. And I'll call my clients like, how are you feeling? Like scared. So I just feel that that's so important to share because even though it is this moment you worked for like 9 years to procure, it doesn't always feel the way that we think it should feel when you've met the goal. And it might even take a couple of weeks for it to settle in that you did meet the goal, right? You did do this thing that you've been planning. So, so how did you deal with it?
Well, I had put into place a lot of things in my life to support what was already a very high level of anxiety. I had a lot of grief from losing my sister, just the ups and downs of life. So much of the book was a product of all of the healing that I had done. And so it kind of was this feed forward cycle of like, wow, like I'm feeling more safe. I can write this chapter. I'm feeling more safe. I can tell this family member. I'm feeling more safe. I can find a publisher. So by the time the book came out, I had already kind of put in all of these supports in my life to feel really safe, assuming that one day my anxiety or my chronic pain would get so bad again that I would really need everything. The other thing I did, which I think if someone doesn't have these kind of underlying mental health challenges, this may sound like, oh, well, that's not me. What I did do is I made plans for the rest of that summer to make sure that I was in places and with people that I really loved in case something really bad happened, or maybe the book didn't sell any copies, or I got a bad email from an extended family member who was really upset with me for telling one story slightly not the way they remember. So I made sure that the summer was full of these memories and these moments. And I picked the timing so that it wasn't, mid-January when my book came out. It was right at the beginning of summer on a day that I love, knowing that I had 2 months of enjoyable family time, time with friends. so that the book kind of almost moved to the background very quickly. And I just got to enjoy the thing that I had created, which was my life. Like that was the whole point, right? Is like, I want to enjoy this life.
I think that's so beautiful. And I think that's such good advice. If you're listening and you're just publishing your book, maybe pack your whole week or month with fun activities, because that does sound like a really good way to just keep the processing going in a safe and happy environment where you're not feeling isolated, because writing and publishing can feel very isolating. So if you can just have that socialization that feels like really good and fills you up, I feel like that is such good advice. How did you go about your publishing journey? Did you seek out a publisher? Did you go through the traditional route, or what was your publishing process like?
Yeah. So I wrote the entire book on the island of Bermuda. And initially, I thought I was going to work with a publisher in Bermuda because there are a lot of authors in Bermuda. It's a very tiny country. You'll go into the one library in town, and there's a whole section of Bermuda authors. And I kind of wanted my book to be part of that legacy, even though I was just there for a couple years. And I met a really great printer. He wasn't a publisher, but he's like, I could print your book. We could kind of do it ourselves and have it just be available from Bermuda. But then he read, and he doesn't know who he's dealing with. It could just be a vanity project. He has no idea what kind of writer I am. When he read the first chapter, he was like, I'm not going to do this. You need to go back to the United States, find a real publisher, do it the right way. He's like, you're not going to sell yourself short. And so I kind of felt like he was a bit of a guardian angel, that he knew he could have been part of this really cool project, but it would have kept it very small. So I remember I contacted a couple Vermont publishers, and I already knew that I wanted to work with someone that I could, if I needed to, drive to their house.
Sure.
Like I wanted it to feel homegrown and like from the ground up. And there aren't that many publishers in Vermont. There's like a handful. So I contacted a few. I remember having one conversation with one of the publishers briefly, and I was pretty sure I was going to go with them. I still hadn't heard from my top choice. Kind of time kept going by. And I remember it was sometime in late May or early June. And I was like, man, it really stinks that that person never wrote me back. And I was heading out the door with my kids. And I was like, I'm just going to try one more time. And I emailed again and got an immediate response by the time I got back to the house. And she's like, I don't know how I missed this. We're still getting back on our feet from COVID. You wouldn't believe how small publishers have just been inundated because everyone's writing, everyone's pitching. And she said, I would be honored, to publish your book. Like, let's talk as soon as possible. And so that was Green Writers Press. That was Dee Dee Cummings here in Southern Vermont. And so it was just, it's possible that if I had let fear dominate that decision, it could have gone in a very different direction. But that, like, why not give it one more chance and just make sure? And also just like the reality of like sometimes people miss emails and then you take it personally, like, oh, my writing must suck. That chapter must have not really had the impact I thought it would have. It's like, no, she just missed the email.
Just human error. We just make mistakes.
Yeah. And then so the process after that with Dee Dee was so smooth. She works with a great, couple writers or couple editors, and they kind of have like a flowing schedule. So I was moving back to the United States at the end of June. I was like, I can't really start on this until the fall. And so they kind of slotted me in. I ended up having to write a whole chapter in the middle of winter, which was a chapter I had dragged my feet about. I had really put off writing. And my editor's like, I feel like there's something missing in this story. And I was like, yeah, it's a whole chapter. I didn't write it. And she's like, why don't you give it a shot? And so it's really cool that most of it was written in this kind of fantasy island location where I needed to feel a certain way about these very personal chapters. But then the chapter that I felt really proud of, which was about my time as a researcher at Hopkins, I wrote here in Vermont. And so it had that stamp of like reality on it.
It's so interesting. The process is so different for every single person, and it can look so different depending on the types of publishers that you choose, or if you just decide to go self-publishing. So that's a really interesting way that they handled all of that. So how long was it from the time that you started working with them until the time that you published your book?
It was almost exactly a year. And it was probably that's like the fastest it could have possibly been. And I still, having talked to other people in, the publishing world, they're like, how did you pull that off? That's like the minimum amount of time between signing and getting the final edits and getting an actual publication date. And I kind of knew like once, because remember, I'd finished writing in 2021 in March. So a year had already gone by. I had done some editing. I had kind of sat with it myself. So I think if I wasn't really ready when I signed with a publisher, it would have taken longer than a year and the edits would have been a lot more painful. But instead, it's like I kind of took that time myself so that when I was ready to go, it was just like, here we go. We're going to make it.
And I think that reflection time is so important, especially in the memoir community, because it's your own story, it's your own history and your own vulnerabilities. And when you publish a book, you have to be prepared for people to come back to you and quote your book to you, ask you about a chapter, ask you further details about a section. And if your heart can't take that, right, it's not time yet. And that's okay, 100% okay. And sometimes we need that. I think it's important to just take the reflection, always do a good amount of editing before you even send it to anyone else, because when we have stream of consciousness thoughts, they don't always connect, right? Thank you so much. This honestly has been so relatable. There's a lot of things, of course, that stand out in your story that are unique, and your process is unique, but the feelings that you experienced and the way that you then conquered your fears feels so relatable. I feel like we all kind of go through this similar journey, especially in the memoir space when it's your own feelings.
Right. And I do think, I mean, the one thing that I haven't really said explicitly, which is I really weighed whether the story itself needed to be told to a large audience for me to get what I needed, which was ease within myself, healing, happiness. And so I think it's really worth asking yourself once you've written it and a few people have read it, and you really think about what is it going to be like to have my life on a platter, being served to the world. Is this going to be the thing that makes me happy? And I think we have to be, as writers and artists, willing to say, like, not yet, or maybe not, and accept the triumph of just having done it. And I think in our world of consumerism, it's all about sales and PR and publishing a certain number of copies, and you just can't get caught up in that, because at the end of the day, all of those metrics are not going to make you happy. I haven't met a single person for whom that worked. I've met authors who got huge advances and they were thrilled for a few months and then it was gone. It's like moving on to the next project. And then you kind of have to keep bettering yourself each time. So I kind of want to emphasize that from the mental health angle, is that if you're writing about yourself and it's hard, really ask whether you're taking care of yourself and having the story out there is not going to cause more harm than good.
Such good That is such good advice, because maybe it's just for the legacy component. Maybe it is just for healing. Maybe it is just for your family so that your story doesn't go unknown. And that is still such an accomplishment. Anytime we write and compile words together to make a book, that's a massive accomplishment. So I totally agree. Do you mind telling my audience where your book title, first of all, because I don't even think we've mentioned it once, where they can find it, where they can find you and your future projects? Because I just know that there's just so much value here, and I would love for my audience to be able to find that.
Yeah. So the book is called Midnight Water, a psychedelic memoir. I made a couple different decisions after the first year of running the kind of mainstream publishing circuit. I wanted more control over how people were receiving the print copy. So I actually got out of my publishing contract and got all the copies sent to my home. So now I get to actually sign every single print copy that goes out, and I get to meet the people who are buying the book, which actually has added so much value for me. I know it's a bit of a strange thing, but I didn't find a lot of traction with bookstores and other ways of meeting people outside of my own launch events. And I was like, man, this is the best part, is meeting the people who will read it and then getting to hear back from them. So the print copy can still be bought through my website, katherinemaclean.org. And that every single book is sent by me from our tiny post office in Vermont. And I made the compromise to keep the ebook and the audiobook on Amazon. So Kindle and Audible are the options for those formats. So it's kind of like the happy medium for all audiences.
I love that. And that's such a unique way to do it. And you do get to connect with each of your readers. So I think that is really beautiful. On that note, I wonder if you have one last piece of advice for our female authors who are on the fence about writing and doing this process and they just need a little bit of encouragement.
Hmm. Well, I think I've said it in different ways before, but the piece that I want to emphasize was being in my happy place, which in my case was Bermuda, was really key. And I've contemplated whether that's an attainable goal for other people. It may sound like, oh, I'll never be able to write this or that because I can't go to my happy place. It is possible to make your happy place where you are, but I could never figure out how to pull it off. So I would say jump at those opportunities. If you see that opening in your life, whether it's a week or a month or some kind of residency or living in your friend's barn to write for the winter, like jump at those opportunities because they'll be there and then they'll be gone. And if you didn't take advantage, it's like you lost something pretty amazing. So that's my advice is like jump at those opportunities and just dive fully in without needing to know what's going to come out of it.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. And thank you for giving us all your wisdom today. I really appreciate it. And I will make sure to have all the links in the description so that they can easily find your book and your website as well. But thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on another episode for Project Seed Money. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And I will see you with another interview next week. Bye.